Değerli konuklar, 16. Uluslararası Kurumsal Yönetim Zirvesi'nin ikinci bölümüne hepiniz hoş geldiniz. Ben Güzem Yılmaz Ertem. İkinci bölümde de sizlerle olacağım. Yemekler yenildi, kan şekerleri biraz yerine geldi, enerji arttı diye görüyorum salondan da. İkinci bölüm aslında ilk bölümdeki o heyecanı daha da yükseltecek. Neler konuşacağız? Aslında çok gündemde olan konular. Guidance on Board Effectiveness diyeceğiz. Yani bundan sonra aslında yönetim kurulunda bir yönlendirme, bir guidance neden önemli? Birazdan konuk konuşmacımız olacak. Kendisinden bu sunumu dinleyeceğiz. Öte yandan beyin göçü, dijitalleşme ki ilk bölümde biraz ilk panellerimizde buna değinmiştik. Bundan sonraki dönemde çeşitlilik ve yetenek yönetimi gibi konuları değineceğiz. Birçok şirket katılacak üçüncü panelimizde ve son olarak da bugün programın son kapanış değerlendirmesinde de özellikle insan odaklı kurumsal yönetim içerisinde yine yeteneği cezbetmek ve elde tutmak temasını değerlendireceğiz, konuşacağız. Şimdi vakit kaybetmeden isterseniz ben konuk panelistimizi, konuşmacımızı sahneye davet edeyim. Sodexo Co. Genel Müdürü Sayın David Reiser alkışlarla sahneye davet ediyoruz. Mr. Reiser, I would like to invite you to stage, please. Thank you. Welcome.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure being here back in Istanbul. I have to say it's a city that's close to my heart. I've been here for the first time with TQID around 15 years ago. I have to say as well, it's vibrant and close to my heart because Turkey is, I have to say, is really an example in terms of steering, leading, thinking on governance aspects. I had the chance to be a few months ago in Brazil for the equivalent of the TQID over there, and these are the two places in the world where you can gather dozens and dozens and hundreds of people around and thinking about governance. That's pretty unique, and I will share with you a few thoughts on an experience on how boards across the world have been addressing actually nowadays challenges. We've seen that in the morning, how boards are navigating turbulent times, how important it is to be actually with human capital and humans leading and steering the wheel. So we'll be sharing here some of the perspective that we have. I've had the luxury of working for the last 25 years with boards all across the globe, from New Zealand, Korea, very recently in the US and Silicon Valley and others. And there are some patterns that can be shared and maybe some insights. And I will finish with some insights around actually governance, boards, and AI. Obviously, that's one of the major topics here. So starting with I'm kind of left France 20 years ago, but still be close to a French quote from Paul Valéry. The trouble with our times, obviously, is that the future is not what it used to be. And if we maybe it's kind of a speech that sounds familiar to you, but we are constantly actually failing at trying to forecast things rightly. So there is one constant is that we are very bad at forecasting. So, but nowadays I think the world has been changing even more than it used to be. So we'll be navigating from the past with actually a bit of the future. Looking at the past, we look at here. I kind of trying to look at how boards were working when I started in the late 90s and looking at 20 years ago. And 20 years ago, these are figures about boards in Europe. And you could see that on average, usually it's really a big growth average, but boards were meetings every 2 months, kind of every 8 weeks. And that was 20 years ago. You could see that 10 years ago, they started to increase the way they've been working, meeting now every 5.5 weeks, 6.5 weeks, every 8 times a year on average. And you could see that now it's been escalating. 2019, more than 9 times. and nowadays it's almost 10 times a year, actually. So the question is, what do boards do when meeting more? Knowing that in Turkey, on average, they meet 19 times a year. So they're still, well, we're still catching up. To me, the main reflection is why would you meet more frequently? And the answer will come with the following sides. Is obviously you have to deal with way more uncertain times, but as well, obviously, changing times. And here, what I will start sharing about boards is that boards are not only changing the frequency, the way they, but as well the way they work. The way they work is in two aspects. Over the year, we've seen few boards now working as waves, I have to say, after the COVID. They work as waves because they distill actually and alternate from in-depth sessions where they really spend the time, and I mean spending the time, which is not only half an hour, 1 hour. They do spend half a day focusing on some of their business lines, some of their portfolios, and rethinking how actually what they've been kind of in their company is relevant today, and what are the risks and the opportunities that lies there. And alternate these discussions with actually the more governance type of aspect. Not many companies do that, though. They tend to have a pretty linear way of organizing the agenda, repeating year after year. But that, after COVID, is something that has definitely changed from the Zoom meetings or Teams meeting that you used to have and meets every 2-3 weeks in crisis times, to actually getting back to normal. But getting back to normal is alternating this briefing between these sessions. That's one. The second aspect as well that I've seen, and these have been discussions with the chair of one of the leading actually company in Europe, but the same reflection with one of the person kind of being the deputy chair of the World Economic Forum as well, and sharing his experience, is that some of the boards now start changing as well, not only the rhythm, but when they meet longer, they change the format as well of their meetings. Meaning that some of them start meeting in the afternoon, and instead of spending the afternoon and closing then, they discuss the strategic topics. They take the time to reflect, then they stop. They have the dinners, the drinks, the informal discussions, the human touch, actually getting back to the humans, with the board members, discussing with senior executives, discussing between themselves, actually, starting to know each other, which sometimes kind of has been lost within the last few years. And starting the following day, in the morning, starting to reflect on these strategic discussions and getting the approvals. So having digested all the information and what is at stake, then discuss and close the board meetings with the more governance type of agendas. So that's one aspect that we've seen, and the reason why they change is simply to cope with the change, and with the change that are all the different risks that you can see that comes from the World Economic Forum, this live wheel that you can follow if you go on their website. And you can see the main risks that have been identified related to environmental collapse, that actually beyond the politicization is still around. And when we discuss with the CEOs of the companies we work, and we've been working with 2,000 companies every year around the world, they do face obviously these challenges as part of business risks and business challenges and business opportunities. You have an aspect that relates to biotechs, aging population, digital polarization, and that's what we will see from AI to disinformation to cybersecurity. I think it's this morning either Ritis or Roger that were mentioning that 5 years ago, not many boards were really discussing cyber risks. Now that's obviously part of every board agenda to review that and how the company is ready on this. So, and obviously you have these political shifts. The thing is that in that context, that's where you need to have board members that are helping management to go beyond these simple risks. And going beyond these simple risks, that's very difficult for you to read behind. The point is not necessary to read, but you see there will be some connections and some dots. And these are actually these kind of connections. And if some of the risks that you could have seen some are new, some are emerging, like the one that we discussed around AI, around cyber. You have others that are actually not very new. If we take some of the threats like environmental, I remember in the 80s you have the acid rains, you have pandemics that ravaged Europe and other parts of the world for in the 19th centuries and earlier. So these risks are not necessarily all new. What is new and what is unique today is obviously their scale, their speed, and their complexity. Complexity, you see that because they are all interconnected. And what does that mean for board members? That means actually that your opportunities, but your threats, are coming from many potential places in the world. If I take a board with whom we worked in Korea, they traveled in China, they traveled in the Silicon Valley, they traveled as well in the Middle East, simply to understand actually where the innovation is coming from, what has been driving, what's the ecosystem needed. So getting closer to the ground and understanding the needs and the threats are obviously one of the unique aspects. The second aspect that has been unique with these risks, beyond the scales and complexity, is actually that because they are all interconnected, it means that to solve them, you often need to have cooperation. And you need to have cooperation in the context today that not many forces are encouraging cooperation. So it's obviously a challenge in terms of business. And we've seen some boards that are working actually on getting very, very close to their business, a network around their value chain. Being close or being kind of more loose, but creating that cooperation around their value chain is a way actually for them to get managing their risks that they are facing and the complexities that are there. So we are in a world that are not only actually more complex, as you know, but where, because some of these risks needs to be managed through cooperation in a world that is not cooperative, you may face these risks that are more frequent to manage. And being more frequent to manage obviously relates and provides a need to work a bit differently. And here, I hope Mrs. Lagarde won't kind of be offended if I quote her, but that's something that we've seen as well more frequently, is that basically we live in an era now of permacrisis, which is the permanent crisis that you can see, where, in a sense, it moves from one emergency to the next. And basically, you need to be prepared to adapt and to actually adjust to this always changing environment. And I'll come to that later, because there are some strategies that companies are approaching that through different angles, either being the first or being agile to follow the others. But in a changing world that is so fast changing, that leads some challenges. Getting back to the theme of today, well, then in that world, you need to have a board where you discuss with talent. You need to have a board that is able to cope with the different sources, the different complexities, either it be through obviously a deep knowledge of the business and the industry, but as well of what leads the transition in a sense. When looking at the composition of some boards, if I take the ESG challenges in the past, you could see that some of the boards were looking for, in terms of skills and experience, in Europe, very much specialists in climate, on climate-related or social. In North America, we could see that the boards were way more looking for CEOs that used to operate in businesses that are changing, and that these businesses that were changing are the ones that were actually threatened in terms of business model through the climate change, for instance. So the one that coming from energy, for instance, businesses. So you can see the approach nowadays. We can see both very much in the US, but it's about finding operational leaders that can sit on boards and bring the experience in transitioning and transforming a business. Now, going to one of the leading change, actually, which if we look at 10 years ago, that's a prediction 10 years ago. 2015, the World Economic Forum was trying to find some of the what they call the tipping points that would transform the society. So they identified 21 points. And many of them actually didn't go through, like 3D printed cars that would be mass-produced, or fully digitalized clothes. I think most of you have the same clothes as I do, which is absolutely not digitalized. But some actually predictions were right, like the one that relates to artificial intelligence. Another one was self-driving cars. So that prediction was that AI would come into the boardroom and would help on decision making. Well, what does that mean, getting into the boardroom? And that will be part of my last slides and conclusions. But if we look at from 10 years ago to now, that's again the World Economic Forum looking at risks and risk that with a 2-year horizon and risk with a 10-year horizon. So from 10 years ago to now, and we're looking forward in 10 years. The reason why I choose that slide and that figure is that it's very much illustrative of what many boards today have been struggling between the immediate future and between the longer term perspectives. And there you can see how that impacts the way boards and companies are addressing strategy. In that front, here, if we want to look at one thing that's been a bit striking is that on the short-term horizon, actually, technology is pretty under the radar still. The adverse outcome of AI is very low, actually, in ranking with that 2-year outlook. However, if we look at the 10-year horizon, actually AI and the impacts is the fastest growing risk. So how does that come to in the boardroom discussions? We've been advising boards and try to help them navigate that turbulent times. So we've been right now doing a global survey discussing with CEOs, board members in the different countries, essentially US, Europe, and a number of APAC. Very few boards actually address today AI in a structured manner. They obviously do. I mean, every board members are playing with ChatGPT. We have even a board that was actually using ChatGPT to make their minutes without thinking that potentially it's leading their minutes to the entire world. So you have this kind of non-education, and we'll come to that. But the thing is that what drives actually discussion in the boardroom is very much either typically regulation, investor pressure, or people. Well, regulation in Europe, you will have the AI Act that will come into force August 2026. And I have to say, today, not many leaders are getting, at least in Europe, discussing AI because of that. You have pressure from investors. That's true, and we'll finish with that. And the ICGN, I don't know if Jen is still in the room, but the ICGN has, in 2020, released actually a paper on boards, effectiveness on AI, actually, and leading some of the thinking around that. But what we found striking is that actually the companies that were driving change in their approach to AI were because they had actually either CEO or board member that were AI literate. It came often about one person that are putting that on the agenda and repeating asking for that. And that was one of the things that really struck us in all these discussions, is that everyone is aware, but then you need to have one person that influences the discussions. Discussions that are not necessarily easy because you have to manage the tensions. That's a study from BCG here about a study about 1,800 C-suite members around AI in 2025. And well, like potentially many like you, that 75% actually do believe that actually strategy and AI is a strategic priority. I'm pretty sure you do believe that as well, potentially, but I think you would agree with this. 25, nonetheless, %, 1 in 4, still really struggle in finding what value it brings today to their business. But nonetheless, within the next 3 years, they all project to increase their investment by 60%. So basically, they will be investing in investments where they don't really need and see the value today. And that's where some of the discussions that we really see in the boardroom as whether we decide as a business to invest nonetheless and to be actually innovative. And it's very much a discussion on risk appetite. Do we want to be at the forefront, innovative, while others, and I have to say the innovation is very much in the US, while others, like in Europe, we're discussing, many of them are let's be agile in the way we follow business. So agility, same in Asia, costs of investments are decreasing, and let's wait. But can you wait? And here I will quote the CEO of Nordic Telecom, is can you really wait when change is happening all the time? And when change is happening all the time, you can be waiting for a long time and managing a slow decline as opposed to leading the change. And leading the change actually will help you to answer some of the pressure. The way a number of companies approach that is often through little steps and be very clear on the strategy. And by starting that, they may be able to answer a number of questions that investors are asking. I won't get there in detail, but what is interesting as well is that over these few years, you have actually investors that do start engaging and asking questions around these following themes, around the foresight. Basically, how do you organize your strategic imperative and take that as a strategy? How do you embed that? How do you think through these risks and opportunities? How as well do you think of AI with a number of geopolitics? Will you follow some Asian path or Chinese path, or rather the US aspects? And that's questions actually that one of the Nordic investors is considering. How do you organize your risk management around this aspect? That's something that now boards are being asked to answer. How do you oversee that, including from an ethical point of view? And if we look at the foresight, if we look at the oversight, how do you ensure that you have the right culture that helps to embed that in the ethics? We're getting back to this, but what was discussed in the morning. How do you adapt your governance structure to ensure the oversight? Do you need a specific committee dedicated to that? Many boards actually task that today in the risk committee. Some have that in their more technology or innovation committee. But basically, institutions like BlackRock are asking about how do you organize your kind of board functioning around this. And mindful of the time, you need to be as well very transparent in terms of disclosures, and that's in a sense how do you explain the way you've been addressing this? It's a bit the same way on ESG. How do you address your risks and your opportunities? That's something that investors want to see, and that's something that the pressure is coming in the boardroom. So before the last slide relates to the fact to do this, you need to be competent. We heard that this morning. We heard that several times. We've seen that if you are not competent in the field, you can barely discuss beyond scratching the surface. And how do you build literacy across the board? The interesting part on building the literacy around the boardroom is that you don't necessarily want to rely on one specialist, even if that specialist is often the one that helps actually to bring the topic in the boardroom, so very, very important. But both the number of chairs with whom we discussed, as well as investors, they don't like relying on one person. So you need to think on building a collective approach to that, and that collective approach may go via actually a specific board. And the last thing is about ensuring the right trainings and keeping up to speed. And I know that TKYD is part of the great thing that's been doing is training. And obviously it's around a lot of education and keeping actually all the board members posting on that topic. And a few concluding remarks I would have is that first, actually, good governance do matter. It mattered in the past, and it does matter now. It does matter now because part of good governance is a robust risk management process, robust relationship between boards and executives. And if you have that in place, actually, you are way better equipped to scan the opportunities, discuss the risks, and size them. That's one aspect. To have these meaningful discussions, you need to have the right people. You need to set the direction. And these actually discussions are then enabled at the right level. And now, kind of last kind of thought, I don't really have the answer now, but to me, one of the fundamental pillars of good governance is accountability. And in some actually sectors, like finance, for instance, you have some questioning about how do I hold accountable my managers that are using actually tools that we don't necessarily know and understand everything that is behind. So holding accountable is something which is different from being responsible. The board are still responsible as managers are. But how do you hold actually people accountable for that? And how do you hold even kind of machines and our non-humans that are able actually to generate decisions? And that is as well to me another aspect around the accountability. I wanted to really thank you. C'est çok teşekkürler. And happy to take the discussion outside the room after. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you again. Hatırlayın ilk bugüne başlarken aslında dedik ki Tamer Bey iki panelde sormuştum. Yani yapay zeka insanın yerini alabilir mi? Aslında şirketler nasıl önceliklendiriyor? Ama buna rağmen işte öngörülebilirlik, regülatörün hangi kararı vereceği ya da risk yönetiminde doğru kararları insan beyniyle alınması gibi aslında David Riesler'ın da söylediği oldukça önemli başlıklar vardı. Şimdi